Okay, we're ready for our next panel, which is entitled Professionalising Our People to Better Serve Our Public. It's going to be led by Andy Kinnear. And we've just heard from Professor Wachter, and he was saying that the professional group of CIOs and CCIOs has a critical role to play in delivering the key recommendations in this report. So by way of response, this is our next panel. Let's please welcome our panel to the stage. They're going to come through this curtain. Here they are. And once they're seated, I will introduce. This is a big panel. Okay. So we have on the end there James Freed from Health Education England, Aid Byrne from the University Hospital Southampton and Chair of Health CIO Network, Mark Gollidge from the Local Government Association. We have Rachel Dunscombe, UK Ambassador for Chime and CIO for Royal Salford NHSFT. Moving on, we have, is that right? Have I got you all right so far? Dr. Phil Kozan, who's the member of the CCIO Advisory Panel, and finally, Terry Dufter from ADAS. And it's over to you.
Thank you, Carrie. Good afternoon, everybody. It's good to see a decent audience here, considering we're up against Simon Stevens, who's one of the other theatres. So I'm just going to ask a question at the beginning. Can those of you who are old enough can remember Live Aid back in 1985, can you remember who the second band on were at Live Aid? Everybody knows who opened the show, but you remember the second band? Because that's what this feels like, coming on after Wachter. Okay, he's just done the big old show. He's opened the biggest global concert the world's ever seen. And we're coming on as the second band. I know you'll know the answer, Aid. I'm coming to it. So the second band on was the Style Council, for those of you who are interested in this. And early in this process, Adrian, myself, and Joe McDonald at the time were in a meeting with Bob Wachter, and he made a comment about CCIOs being the new rock stars in the US. They kind of become that important to the system in the US. And I'm sort of carrying on that analogy. So in the context of Live Aid, I'm seeing Bob very much as the Francis Rossi of this deal. And I'm putting myself in the Paul Weller role. Maybe it works, maybe not. So we've got a really decent panel here. We are going to concentrate our conversation. So just to sort of let you know in advance, we've heard what you've heard on the Wachter review. So we've heard it in real time, live in the last hour. So the reactions we're giving and some of the thoughts we're giving, just please take in that context. This is early ideas and things that are landing. But we did know somewhere in advance that he was going to put a bit of a focus, and he got to this at the end of his presentation really, on an investment in the professionalisation of, in particular, the CCIO workforce. But I think actually it extends beyond that into the wider clinical and social care community, and into those digital leaders we've already got in the system, as well as our chief exec and executive layer. So we've really concentrated, and we're going to concentrate our reflections in the next 45 minutes or so on how we deliver that professionalisation. So to sort of kick that off, what I was going to do, I'm going to run through a few slides, nothing too heavy, but just give an idea of some of the things that are in flight already, or concepts that are being worked on, or pieces of work, or organisations that are already working towards an agenda of professionalising our digital workforce, and who are now, frankly, very alive to the idea that 42 million quid of that 4.2 billion might be well available to us to go and make that journey a lot easier and a lot more professional in the way we deliver a professionalised workforce. So just to sort of confirm who I am and why I'm speaking, I'm a bit of a job collector. I've got loads of different roles in life. I won't bore you with all of those. But today I'm predominantly here as in my capacity as chair of the BCS Health and Care Executive. So British Computer Society, an organisation really committed to making IT good for society. Hang on, I'm in a Paul Weller moment. And so that's what I'm talking to. And in terms of the panel I've got, I'll just run down these guys. So Adrian's here. Adrian is CIO at University Hospital Southampton. He's also chair of the CIO network. We'd hoped to have Joe McDonald. There's been a crisis, a lack of peas pudding in the northeast, so Joe's had to stay back home in Newcastle. Oh, excuse me. So Phil Kozan has stepped in. Phil has been an active member of the CCIO network from inception. He's also one of the CCIO advisory panel. James joined us from Health Education England. As I'll describe in a minute, James is really charged with making this stuff happen at the kind of top of the shop. Mark and now Terry in the Julie chair are here from our local authority space, and actually I'm really keen that every single dialogue we have around professionalising the delivery of digital, that social care is not kind of the afterthought it often feels like it might be in some of these conversations. It's front and centre. And if we are truly going to bake interoperability into the beginning, then actually having the local authorities actively in that dialogue is really critical. And then last but not least, by far from least, Rachel's here. So Rachel is CIO at Royal Salford, which is very much one of the leading light acute trusts in the country, but also in the context of today's conversation, she is the UK ambassador for Chime, and I'll get to that in a minute and describe why that's relevant and important. So the case for professionalism really is it's kind of really made, isn't it? We've sat and listened to Bob over the last hour. There's loads and loads of sort of national reviews and things over recent time that have really talked about that need to professionalise. And actually, if we look around the rest of the health and care sector, we see colleagues in their professional disciplines who are truly professional. They can be struck off for being incompetent. They are developed and they have investment in their continuing professional development, so on and so forth. So whole things that you would associate with a profession, and yet in the digital space, despite repeated attempts, we've not quite got over the line on that piece, and now really feels like the moment. And the sort of the problem is that actually we've reached a point where you can do, doctors can do probably as much damage with a keyboard as they can do with, with a prescription pad or whatever it might be. There's a point at which patient safety is critically linked to, to digital capability, and the opportunity. The opportunity is everything Bob talked about. The whole, Google world that will open up. Sorry, James, I'm going to slaughter this slide for you, but in essence, what we're saying is that professionalism space has a lot of moving parts within it, lots of kind of active players who we need to sort of coordinate around to do that. Lots of them about what the health and care workforce need to know, the information, the skills, the ability to actually create that digital world. And then also, where do they find the knowledge to plug the gaps that they've got? But actually critically sitting at the centre of that is, how do we assure ourselves that people are competent, they are digitally competent in their roles? And I guess there's, I'll certainly ask James to sort of describe this in far greater and better detail than I can, but really you've got people who are informaticians, people who touch the digital world, you've got people who might need to sign up to and agree to sort of voluntary standards to be part of their role, and then frankly you're going to have people where this stuff needs to be mandated, and you shouldn't be sitting in that chair if you've not got the badge and done the qualification and achieved the relevant CPD. And actually this is quite reassuring. So people are probably familiar with this. I don't know about you guys. I carry a version of this around laminated in my bag all the time. So this is the new national programme, the version of the national programme that we're working to currently. These are the 10 domains and the 33 work streams. I haven't quite got to the point where I can quote them exactly yet, but it's certainly getting close. And actually I think it's quite an exciting piece. It's a bit tragic when you get excited about these things, but I think for the first time in probably 15 or 20 years, we've got something of a national digital strategy that makes sense all the way from Whitehall down to the hospital ward. And actually pretty much everything I work on in my daily life, I can find a slot on that diagram that does it. And all very reassuring. And the bit that really cheers me up, there it is, Domain G, Workstream 24, Workforce and Professional Capabilities. So there's actually a programme as part of this national piece focusing on the very thing that we are talking about today. So that's good news. More than that, and again, James, I'm not going to steal your thunder at all, but there's an actual programme in place. So there's some thinking going on already around what are the things we're going to do in leadership, what are the things we're going to do with the wider workforce, what are the bits we're going to do around professionalism and the creation of professional bodies and regulation, and what are the enablers to make that happen. So this isn't a standing start from Bob said get on with it and we need to begin from nothing. Lots and lots of thinking is already going on and has gone on over that time. There's also some very active and almost at fruition. I'd hoped to be saying it was all done and dusted by today, but it's not quite. But some active work to bring together the bodies that would accredit and ensure that we have a professional workforce in place. So you can see my own role within BCS there on there, but all of those organisations that run across the top of that are working flat out to create the Federation of Informatics Professionals and effectively create that overarching regulatory body to support the professionalisation of our industry. Now, I guess really I should have focused on health CCIO, but actually I just I sort of worked up examples of some of the things that are in flight, particularly around my role and the kind of role that people I feel, just as an example of the ways in which we're attempting to professionalise, perhaps to stimulate some of the conversation. So I'm going to skip through this one quite. This is one slide I borrowed from some folks in America, but it sort of describes what we do. So what I think I do, I run NASA, obviously. I've got the most complicated set of IT. What my mum thinks I do day to day, it's not very far off the truth, actually. That's what she thinks. This is what finance think we do in the digital space. What the business thinks we do is just sit there, play games, and try and achieve all of that. What they actually want us to do, clearly, is magic. And actually what it really feels like we're doing is something a bit more like that. And this is kind of the, in many ways, the problem that people are looking at it through their various lenses. And actually what we've seen in the CIO role in particular is a role that's actually changed through time. So something that goes from being the guy who buys the tin and sticks it in a room and makes sure everybody's got a PC on their desktop or whatever, has really morphed into roles that really are around how do we change the business and take advantage of all the things that Bob alluded to in his talk to do that. And this idea of CIO version 1, CIO version 2, and now we're entering an era of CIO version 3 that takes us way beyond that kind of IT manager looking after the server room and proud of the amount of chrome and flashing lights they've got. This slide's just I've included, I'm a geography graduate, so if somebody gives me a chance to put up a slide on fluvial geomorphology, I can't really resist it, to be absolutely honest. So I'm not going to talk about the geography in this piece, but this is a bridge in Honduras, and it's sort of in the wrong place. What's happened there is a Hurricane Mitch in, I think, 1998, swept through the Caribbean and hit Honduras, and essentially overnight, well, over about 48 hours, moved the course of the river. Now, the company that built this bridge, a Japanese company, actually used this as part of their marketing as to how brilliant they are at doing their job, because all of the other bridges in Honduras were written off, and yet this bridge is still stood standing. But tragically, the world has moved from under it. The river has moved from under your bridge. And I sometimes think that's what's going on with some of my colleagues in the CIO space. So they're doing a rock-solid job of the bridge, but actually the whole world is moving under them. Our profession and their expectations of us is moving out from under them. So they might be doing a cracking job of looking after the server room or keeping everybody on the network, or the service desk has got its it's answering all the calls within 4 rings or whatever. All of that basic stuff is doing really grand. But in the meantime, there's a digital world being created, and they're not part of that play. And that's just, frankly, not good enough for the space we're in. So what are we doing? We're starting to bring proper qualifications to the country. The Certified Health CIO, something Rachel will talk a bit more about it. We're attempting to bring a proper qualification to the UK for CIOs to be able to say, bang, do you know what, I'm certified and I can do the job. We've kicked off the Cio Pledge, and we launched this at summer school this year, and this is where we are committing as a profession to professionalise ourselves, to professionalise our workforce, to be evangelical about our profession and that digital world, and to really sort of drive that out to support our public and the workforce that we work with. It was launched in the middle of July, so only a couple of months ago. We got 63 signatories there, including, most importantly, obviously, the chair of the network. So really, I'm going to sort of leave it there. The purpose of doing that really was to just sort of get some juices flowing amongst people in the room around what are the kind of themes that we're working on. What I was going to do is kick off now and ask these guys to just give a bit of reflection on what they heard from Bob, perhaps through, ideally through the lens that they're looking at, and then we'll open it up and we'll have a bit of a wider discussion, get some questions from the floor. So perhaps James, I'm picking on you unfairly, but why why don't we start with you? Because you're kind of charged with this job at Health Education England. You're kind of going to be running some of this stuff. So why don't you give your reflections on what you heard? Are you encouraged by what you've heard in what Bob's talked about from WAPTA?
Yeah, so to jump to the end, yes, very much so. I should say that I'm not, although I am the Chief Information Officer of Health Education England, my interest here is as the Programme Director of the programme that is Andy's favourite, all the arrows around it, which is a National Information Board programme, and it is truly cross-system. So I'm here as a representative working for a single organisation, but I have all those other organisations, at least in theory, behind me with this. So yeah, I think I found Robert's presentation really interesting, really, really encouraging. I think it's wonderful to see a really high-level, a really powerful person commissioned by the Secretary of State talk about the importance of people. I see the program that I'm delivering as, I guess, the people part of a huge technology program, which is the entirety of the National Information Board's work, all of those 33 programs. We've known for a long time in informatics that in order to get a technology program to work, you need three things. The technology, yes. The people, absolutely. And the processes. And we also know that there's been a real temptation, which we have fallen into time and time again, to over-invest in the technology side and forget about the other two. And this is a great opportunity to reverse that trend. There's some evidence that demonstrates that you need to spend at least half of your investment on the people and processes bit. Some people say as much as 5 times on that as they would on the technology themselves. Technology itself. Clearly, it's horses for courses, and different things require different investment. Yeah. Nonetheless, this is the great first step. I think that what I would say is not a missed opportunity, but there is a focus clearly here on the acute sector and on healthcare. And not to steal my social care colleagues' thunder, but I was, I suppose, a little disappointed that there wasn't more of a focus on the entirety of health and care. I think I am relieved that in the question and answer session afterwards, Bob talked about the necessity to look at the recommendations of the entirety review across the whole of health and care. So I'm hoping that after this initial iteration is up and running, we'll start to see the learning passed across the whole system.
Okay, thanks, James. So, Aid, from your perspective, and I guess you've got 2 angles on this. You've got your trust and what happens in and around Southampton, but also, you know, as chair of the CIO network, then there's obviously a vested interest in growing our profession, I guess.
Yeah, obviously, the CIO network is getting very behind this kind of leadership agenda that's on there now. One of my favourite quotes on this comes from a chap most of us will know, or at least have heard of, Gwyn Thomas, who used to head up the Information Authority, responsible for the old strategy back in 1998, Information for Health. I heard him speak once, and he was talking about us NHS IT so-called professionals and the fact that most of us had just kind of wandered in, really. That was his little saying on it. We've come in from all angles, really. I'm a scientist by background, medical laboratory scientist. I ended up looking after, you know, the classic sort of server room that you talk about in the IT part of the lab, and migrated on from there through various routes to where I am today. And there's so many routes to get where we are. But the fact is that our organisations absolutely rely on the informatics services that we run now, whether they realise it or not. And actually, you know, some of them probably still don't realise it. It creeps up on you, this. You suddenly lose something and you realise that everyone is relying on it. You know, I dare to say that if the network went down in our hospital now for very long, we'd have to shut the place, you know. So professionalism, making sure that we have right, you know, change control process, and we understand what that is all about, and the leadership side of it that goes behind that is now becoming more and more important, that we're set up properly. And also, there's another angle to this, which is partly related to what you said about the ability to do damage. I think if we have people who are malpracticing in our organisations right now in digital, there is absolutely no recourse to them whatsoever. There's nothing that we can do. They can do things with data, and then leave and then go and do it somewhere else. And there's nothing they can be struck off from. And I think that's another angle that we need to be picking up as a part of this professionalisation agenda.
Okay. So Mark, over to you. So you're the first voice of local authority coming from the LGA perspective. So it'd be interesting to get your reflections on whether you feel it is too acute focus, perhaps.
So I was actually one of the people that has flicked through the report in the last 2 hours that it's been published. I think if you're sat there...
That's professional behaviour.
It was. If you're sat there not from an acute provider and you're thinking, well, actually, the report's not for me, I disagree with that. Yes, the report is predominantly focused on the acute, but actually, one of the things that Robert does really early on in the report is set out 10 core principles. And many of those principles around the implementation, which he's touched on already, are applicable whether you work in health, whether you work in social care, whether you work in a whole variety of different sectors. Things like the focus on service user or patient involvement, the focus on people, the focus on it's not about IT, actually it's about transformation first. So I'd encourage you to read the report. And I think I was heartened from the report, actually some of those principles apply across sector, not just within the acute sector. In relation to the report, the other aspects of the report, yes, there is a heavy emphasis around the acute, and I think we're in a challenge, aren't we, around local areas that are moving as part of their new care models, and they're looking at how do we effectively share information across care settings, but how can you do that if there are individual care settings that perhaps aren't up to the level of digital maturity? And there's a balance, I think, to be struck about actually recognising that there is some work to do within individual care settings, whether that's community, mental health, social care, or the acute, but also focusing around information sharing across place as a whole. And I think there's that challenge that we need to work through as we move forward.
All right, so over to you, Rachel. So it'd be interesting, I guess, certainly for the audience to know perhaps a little bit more about the opportunity Chime offers, or this idea that we can take professional qualification elsewhere and perhaps apply it?
Yeah, so just before I start on the Chime side of it, I'd like to pick up on the local authority side. So the Centre of Digital Excellence submission we put in, we are an integrated care organisation. The social workers work for us, the community is part of us, and I'm very pleased that within that proposal that we put in for funding, it includes that end-to-end, because those new care models, the boundaries are blurred. So for me, we are a system. We're not an acute anymore. We do have to see things that way. And I think a lot of the learning that will come out of some of the digital exemplars will be around the social care side of it. But on to Chime. So I guess my conundrum as a CIO in healthcare has always been, what does professionalism mean? And Andy and I have had some really long debates about this, because I was a member of 4 professional bodies at one point, and I actually chucked in my BCS membership because it wasn't giving me any value and stuck with the other professional bodies. I'm now rejoining the BCS. Andy's championed that. But the whole conundrum for me is we do come from different backgrounds, and rightly so. We've got some really great diversity. And Philippa, who took over my job at Bolton when I left, she's a clinician by background, but we've got completely different education histories. And I think we need some common learning that pulls us together. Now, certainly in the Northwest, we've done some amazing work with the ISD. We've got some people from the ISD in the room, but that's only been, to date in the Northwest, and that accreditation and education program and university partnership has not been spread across the country. So on my own kind of journey of what professionalism means, I decided to go and do the US qualification for CIOs, which is CHCIO, which is Chime, the US College of CIOs for Health, their qualification, partly because we're always told that America's better than us, and I do believe that we've got some wonderful folks in our system, but partly out of curiosity, really. I've got my final exam on Friday, so we'll find out if I actually pass. But for me, that's been really important for the system, because we suddenly need to get a lot more skilled people into the system who are enthused by all of this. We've been behind, and I think we are 10, 15 years behind, other industries. If we're going to do this well, we need everyone on the same page. And so the Chime piece and that professionalism that I get by being a member of the US College of CIOs, and the ISD work that we do, and the CHCIO that I'm taking to be a qualified US CIO, it is really important to me, and I think we all need to go on that journey together. It means that I'm a professional. The learning is really valuable in my role, but the more we all do this, the more that we're talking a common language, and the more that we're equipped to do our job. So It's just really important.
And do you think this could end up being something that's a kind of mandatory standard, actually? I mean, should a health organisation have a CIO that hasn't got a, regulated...
Yes, so we need to be regulated, and there
qualification?
needs to be learning. I'm not saying that there is just one path to that learning, but there needs to be an equivalent level of learning for all of the people. And the system needs to ring fence the time for the CIOs to do that, because we come from different backgrounds. So, if I've got an OT as a CIO, I've got somebody that's not done a degree but's done postgrad learning, I've got somebody else here that came up through NVQs and other routes but is perfectly good. We need to get them all on the same page. But the system needs to make the space and the curriculum available for them to do that.
Okay, so Phil, moving on to you. You're the rock star on the panel. You're the clinician. You're the doctor. So just interesting to get your reflection. I mean, is what Bob Wachter explained today? Is this pressing the right buttons? Is this hitting the money?
I certainly think he welcomed the focus on CCIOs and the importance around education, training, and how we bring them on board. Maybe just a little bit about my own personal journey. I'm a GP by background, and for the 20 years that I've been a GP, all the time I've captured data at the point of care directly into the computer, captured it electronically. But that data stayed within the silos, and it's been increasingly frustrating as I've spent more and more time in informatics, clinical informatics, looking at integrated care and how we improve that, to see the challenges that people face within, particularly within hospitals. How you actually get the right clinicians involved in driving that care. Working out the focus on the user interface that he mentioned. I've seen time and time again, clinicians getting frustrated about the technology. So we absolutely need to focus on that. Set the important bit, I think, is setting the vision. So what's the vision for what we need to aspire to? And it was mentioned at the end of his talk about the absolute need to bring in social care, to bring in integrated care across the whole community. But equally, I do welcome the focus on clinicians within the acute sector. Now, one of the big challenges I face is how do we identify and train those clinicians? A lot of people I see, young clinicians particularly, they've got a hobby, they've got an interest in informatics, but actually it's very difficult for them to take that beyond a hobby into a role that's recognised both professionally and within their organisation. And we're seeing big changes now. We've got the CCIO network that I've been a member of for 4 years, bringing together a community to discuss ideas, to actually create some support for each other, but also within the professions, looking at how we can create a faculty of informatics to support clinicians that want to go on that journey. So I think the important thing is this is a small step on a long journey. Absolutely welcome it, but I think we've got challenges ahead. Excellent,
thank you, Phil. And Terry, so coming from much from a representative of social services, interesting to get. I mean, it's certainly interesting to have your question during at the end of Bob's presentation. I guess it alluded to where you were coming from, but it'd be interesting to just get your reflections on how we perhaps make sure the good work that's been done in lots of communities to generate a closeness between health and social care is maintained as we deliver the recommendations from this work.
I think I sort of put my cards on the table really with the question that I asked. My worry, and I'm reassured now because Mark, who's actually read the report, which I hadn't, is assuring me that obviously that it is a whole system look. Because what I wouldn't want, as I said in the question, is a whole population of slick and very modern acute hospitals, and we're still faxing information and no clear linkages back out into the community from the social care side. I do think social care, I think equally though, we do have to step up within social care. I was a director in Stockport up until recently, and I think the challenge for social care informatics as such is that for too long we've been diluted by being pushed into corporate teams, and that specialism around social care has got diluted, and a lot of the staff who previously had a lot of knowledge, experience and so on around the implications for social care data, how it should be used, how you transfer it and use it externally, can get lost. So I think this is also an opportunity for social care to step up and clearly define what our expectations are around information and what we would want a CIO around social care to offer and provide. Because at the minute, I think we are a bit between a rock and a hard place. We're partly in corporate teams and partly trying to link up with colleagues in health. And I think we really do need to have much more of an identity. The only other point I'd make is echoing what Rachel was saying, really, and that is just trying to get opportunities and see opportunities when they arise. You know, the hospital where Rachel works is a PAC. It's one of the leading PACs in the country, and to me, this is an excellent opportunity to really try and work with Salford and show that there can be a good link between hospital and community, and to genuinely build an infrastructure where, in a sense, the patient partly controls the data and it moves with them, whether they be in an acute ward or back home. So, I mean, I welcome the new world that's coming in that sense. But I do think then social care has to be clear about what its expectations are, and equally what its expectations are with the many agencies and organisations that it commissions, because obviously social care buys most of its care. The nursing home sector, home care sector and so on mustn't be forgotten in this. They're a key part of what we offer, and how they are pulled into this world of supporting people at home and keeping them out of hospital, which in a sense is the policy direction we're heading for. We can't just assume it's just social care, health. It's that whole system that the challenge is for us to work in and to pull together and to weave together into one system.
And Terry, can I ask, do you have the equivalent of a CCIO in social care? So is there who sits in that seat, and is there, in the way that we'll end up with CIOs, we'll end up with chief nursing CNIOs, digital expert CIOs, the chief execs and brief. Yeah. Is there a sort of lead professional in social care that takes a lead for digital, or could there be out of a?
Well, no, currently. Yes, there should be, I think, and I think that's one of the issues that comes out of this, and we'll be picking up with Mark and the LGA about whether it's something we should strive for in the future.
Okay, that's good. All right, I think Adrian got a point to make. While Aid's making his point, can folks who are interested in asking a question sort of make themselves known? Hopefully a roving mic of some sort will make its way. So if you do that, Aid, you carry on.
Sure. I just want to pick up on this point about investment in secondary care, and somehow, you know, the secondary care sector is a black hole for money going in and nothing and no information coming out. You might say, oh, well, Aid would think that. He works in a big hospital, so this is great news for him. Looking at Steve over there as well, I think he's got a big smile on his face. Really, I want to compare it with what Bob Wachter said about the commercial interest, and when consumables and people who write consumer technology, consumer software, and when they get interested and the market taking off, it's because the NHS is now becoming digitized, that the consumer sector and the apps world and all of that thing we're waiting for is going to get interested. And it's not until we've got this data in a structured form that really happens. And what we all know is there's huge amounts of data in acute hospitals like mine, massive amounts. We've got 10 million documents in a document repository, 100 million sets of results in an order communication system. All of that can be used for research and be used for apps and put data in the hands of patients and all of that. But it's not until you get the investment in this area that kind of market, if you like, is going to take off. And that's what we really need to do in secondary care, take us to that next level, I think.
All right, so let's move on to some questions from the audience. The gentleman, yep, you.
Hi, my name's John Parry. I'm a GP and I work for TVP. I'm pleased that the assembled multitude have stretched the Wachter review across, sideways across the health and social care system. But the bit that's worrying me is that from my limited experience of the American model, everything is very doctor-centric. Doctors run hospitals. And I believe that we still are not maximising our use of IT unless, of course, we have very good business change and IT trainers embedded in the systems, embedded in the organisations. Is there enough in the Wachter review to acknowledge the importance of ongoing developments of systems and people at the ground level who are going to produce the right changes that need to support digitisation?
Who would like to say that?
Thank you for that, John. And I think the important thing is, from the clinician's perspective, deliberately within the UK, we focused on CCIO, so Chief Clinical Information Officer. This is not saying that it needs to be doctors, but it's clinicians across the board. And we've got some very keen, enthusiastic people within the network that are not doctors. We've got nurses, we've got paramedics, a whole range of different professions. And from my perspective, it's very important that we work with them, we nurture them, and we find ways of bringing them in. Absolutely vital that that it works across the sector, not just in acute, but community, mental health, and general practice, and also, of course, social care.
I think James has got a point to add. We'll work the mic along.
Thanks. I think you were making 2 points, John. So the first was around doctor centricity. Interestingly, there's a paper published earlier this year from AMIA, the American Medical Informatics Association, I think that's what it stands for, talking about the different capabilities for different types of CCIO. They do actually have quite a variety. They've got CNIOs, nursing, dentistry, pharmacy. This country, although Phil's absolutely right, we wish to have a much broader diversity in our chief clinical information officers. It is quite medical centric in the UK at the moment. There is a growing interest in nurses and AHPs becoming much more digitally savvy. So, for instance, the NMC is very interested in adopting digital capabilities in their annual refresh of nursing capabilities. The NHS England's nursing strategy has got 10 commitments, one of which is that nurses should have a greater understanding of digital and the use of information technology. The RCN's Congress, their annual conference, passed a motion that stated that every nurse should be an e-nurse. There is a real groundswell. One of the reasons why Andy talked about excitement, I think certainly one of the reasons why I'm excited is that it seems like this alignment of the planets when it comes to professionalism and it comes to interest in knowledge about digital and IT. The second point you were making is around other skills rather than just skills that are exemplified by CIOs or CCIOs, I think. You're talking about change management. Certainly the program that I'm trying to run, although much of the work will not be done centrally, it'll be taking advantage of all sorts of local initiatives. So Rachel mentioned the ISD network, for instance. Julie Oxley's in the audience has been doing some work around digital championship. So we're really interested in doing three things. Firstly, professionalizing people who recognize themselves as informaticians, experts. Often people who've got the knowledge, but not necessarily the power. The second work stream is around leaders. How can we influence those at the top of organizations, usually on boards, executive level people don't necessarily have a background in digital at all, to recognize the importance of this sort of technology and the use of data and information in their organizations and their wider health economy? And how can they encourage the informaticians in their organizations to join professional organizations and to help them not just become digital experts, but digital leaders and digital champions? The third piece of work is around the pull from other professions. So I talked about the nursing profession, but there's a digital strategy being written for the allied healthcare professionals, and Andy threw up a slide that talked about the Faculty of Medical Informatics, which actually launch as the Faculty of Clinical Informatics, referencing the fact that we don't just want medics, we want all clinicians involved at the highest level in this agenda.
Okay, thanks, James. Next question. Phil?
Hi, my question relates to a more immediate problem, which is, I'm Phil Stradling, NHS England. I've been looking at the digital roadmaps and whether we've got the skills and the resources to support the transformation plans. So I can see in Manchester and Salford got a good team, in London a good team. Perhaps in the south, can't quite see the same team. So given that's your patch, how would you take some of the things you're talking about and look at how we create the right skills, the right resources, so the digital roadmaps can take the whole system view and more effectively support the transformation plans?
Yeah. So I think I'll start, and then others will chip in, no doubt. But I think one of Beverly Bryant's reflections, actually, when she talks often, is that we, in different parts of the country, we have already delivered the future. So you can find very often working examples of the future having been delivered in, particular organisations or particular communities, but probably nowhere yet have we done and created the full integrated digital health and care piece. And one of my sort of personal reflections on that is that very often when you start looking under the surface of those successful organisations or successful geographies, you find one or more seriously competent individuals who have drawn it together, have got the skills, are truly professional in their approach, are kind of evangelical about the difference digital health can make, and that is why the success happens. Well, for me, that is a little bit leaving it to chance. So it's a little bit random that we get these folks in these various places, and actually in other geographies where those people, for whatever reason, just haven't appeared or don't exist, or haven't frankly been invested in, because they might be there, but they just haven't been grown to be to the level of capability that they need. Then we're seeing weaker levels of delivery. So I think there's a real. I wouldn't be doing the gig I'm doing with the BCS if I didn't really believe in this. I think there's a real virtuous cycle from investing in people's capability and professionalising those who will do the delivery, to then realising the delivery, to then realising the benefits and making a difference to the patients. It's a really pretty simple equation when you put it together. I don't know if any others want to sort of add, reflect. I know I'm a bit on a hobby horse with this one.
Yeah, I can see both sides of the coin, really. As Andy said, some of it's about investment. We're not going to get there overnight. This programme to become, digital exemplar, for example, will see, roughly a doubling in investment in informatics in a hospital. No one can just double their capacity to deliver an electronic record overnight. So how are you going to work with it? It's about leadership and developing the people that are around you, creating relationships with local colleges, I think, to try and bring people through there into your service, and bringing the suppliers along. It's all going to be sort of slow burn, I think, is the old term. But I have to say, if I look around me, and if I look around, how I'm in Hampshire, I see lots of good people about, so I'm not disheartened by it. I just want to finish on that, really.
All right. So one of the ways we'll measure success in the digital health and care space is when the One Show does a feature on our world, right? And one of the ways we'll achieve that is because we won't wind up our host for this session by overrunning our time. So we've got 5 minutes left. I'm going to make this the last question. The gentleman over there.
How can you get proper care if nobody knows your illness? I've got a rare illness to which I can't get the appropriate care because nobody knows what I need.
So that's interesting. So this is coming from a patient perspective. Hey, you'd be a good person to start.
Well, two things really. One is you may not be aware that a group of chief clinical information officers got together in Newcastle a couple of years ago and created something called the Newcastle Declaration, which part of that was that every patient should have a right that their doctor who's treating them knows what is wrong with them and has all the information about them. So, and we're all behind that. So that's the first thing. So we're in agreement. So lots of us, and indeed it's a part of the Digital Exemplar programme that's being announced today, lots of us are working on access for patients to their system, to their data, so that they can share that data. And there's going to be a lot more sharing of data between patients and care professionals and care organisations, health and care organisations. So I agree with you, it hasn't been great to date, but I can promise you it's going to get better.
Phil, do you want to make a comment? Because you're the chap that's seeing the patient face to face.
Thanks. I think that there are several projects that are beginning to look at this in a lot of detail. So I'm involved in projects within London, which is taking records. There's a focus on patients with neurological disease and making those records available in urgent care situations through 111. So that's the first bit. And I think the second bit, which maybe we haven't touched on throughout the whole of the review process, is how we give patients access and control of those records. So again, I'm involved with the Patient Online programme, which is about giving patients access to those records and then being able to share it with professionals as they see them. So there is functionality within some of the GP systems where the patients can see their record and actually show that to clinicians looking after them. And I think those are examples about where we're doing stuff now. The vision is how we make that more comprehensive and make it contain contributions from across the whole health and social care system. I think we're making some very small important steps, and hopefully this will continue that journey.
All right. So thanks for your time. One last point I was just going to make just before the end is that lots of this professionalism agenda and the way it's been driven is being driven by volunteers. It's been driven by people who are stepping out of the service and stepping into roles and engaging in the process and supporting James and colleagues at national level in developing thinking and developing and doing this work. So if you're sitting there thinking, crikey, this sounds pretty cool actually, and I wouldn't mind being part of that space, do not be shy. Now is the moment to start putting your hands up and say, yeah, you know what, I'm willing to put a bit of time in, I'll put my shoulder against the wheel and we'll drive this thing to a good end and genuinely develop a truly professional digital health and care workforce. Could you just all join me in thanking our expert panel? We done?
Thank you very much to Andy. Thank you very much for the panel. Fantastic comments there. I think also just one thing I wanted to say as a patient is it's not just about adaptive change for the workforce, but actually that must include the patient.
Yeah.
So the patient feels that they can lead in their own health and they can be a part. Like you just said, who was it that just said you can sit in your appointment and say, here's my medical record. Oh, someone's actually trusted me with it.
Yeah.
So that there's more leadership from patients. I'm sure many of us feel that we can do that. Thank you very much to our panel and to Andy. In about 5 minutes, we go into our next panel, which is on an incredible subject, in fact. We're looking at transforming end-of-life care and why we can't afford not to. So if that's of interest to you, we'll back in about 5 minutes. Thank you.